So we're about to see the Passover. The last Passover is about to be eaten. And he says here, and he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. And his disciples went forth and came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. How hard is that to read, brethren? It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? But I was taught in the church I grew up in my whole life that this was just a forerunner. It really wasn't the Passover, because he would be our Passover the next day in the story of John, with the Passover being the next day. We'd call this the Last Supper. Now, brethren, we want to know the truth, right? That's all I'm after. I don't have any agenda. I don't want anything from anyone. I just want to know the truth, because the truth will do what?
Set you free.
It'll set you free, baby. It'll allow you to come to know the one who made you. And so we know, brethren, that indeed that night is so important for you to see it this year, because this year is exactly the same as the year that Jesus was crucified.
Wow.
Exactly the same. So when we go through everything here Thursday night, this next Thursday night, it'll be exactly what's taking place right here in Mark chapter 14. Pretty awesome, isn't it? It's unbelievable. But that's what we are going to see. And we know that the lamb was killed on the 14th, and therefore we know that Jesus was died on that next day, because he was considered to be the lamb, but he was not the lamb of that last Passover, because he was eating the Passover. He was not the lamb of that Passover. He was the lamb of the Jewish calendar Passover the next day. And we'll see that as we go on. But Jesus was betrayed. Excuse me. Drop down to verse 43. Drop down to verse 43. And of course, Jesus warned him that the one that he dipped in the sop with would be the one who would betray him. Drop down to verse 43. And immediately while he was spoke, comes Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude, with swords and staves, from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And he that betrayed him had given him a token, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, the same is he. Take him and lead him away safely. And as soon as he was come, he goes straightway to him and says, Master, Master, and kissed him. What a betrayal. Now, brethren, I'll tell you straight out, there's no worse feeling in the world than betrayal. There's nothing worse. When you put your confidence and trust and belief in something or someone, and they deceive you, and they betray you. And here Judas betrayed the Master. Betrayed him with a kiss. Drop down, if you would, to verse 53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest. And with him were assembled all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. So they're all there waiting for him. Now, this is Thursday night. So know the time setting. This is Thursday night. We're taking place here. Drop down, if you would, to verse 64. You've heard the blasphemy. I won't take the time to read the story here, but you know it. If not, you need to read it again. And Jesus was saying that he'd be the one coming in power, and he'd be sitting at the right hand of God. And they, of course, called him blasphemous, that he was just a crazy guy. And verse 64, he says, you have heard that blasphemy. What think you? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. Right there, he was condemned. Now, what night was this? Thursday night. Now, let's understand and make sure we understand the prophet Matthew, or the apostle Matthew. Matthew tells us something that's been so misunderstood. By the church I grew up in, we tried to help God out because we didn't think he could count 3 days and 3 nights. So we changed the whole story that's in this book so we can make it be 3 days and 3 nights, or 72 hours. If you would go to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. Let me just tell you straight out, God doesn't need any help. We don't need to help him write the story. He's written the story, and the story is complete, and we don't need to help him write it so we can help people understand. But that's what people want to do. They want to reread or rewrite or reinterpret things so we can help people understand. But look, if you would, in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 40. And he said, I'm going to give you a sign, but there's only going to be one sign that you're going to have. It's the sign of Jonas. Verse 40. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. Now, of course, the whale is inserted there, and it refers to the fish's belly. We don't know what kind of fish it was. We think whale because a whale's a big fish. But maybe God just created some individual fish, big, to put Jonah in. But he says here, he was 3 days and 3 nights in the fish's belly. So shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, brethren, here's where things go awry. The churches of God that I grew up in will say that he's going to be 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. And so therefore they start counting the story that we read here in Matthew, Mark, and Luke in the story of the Passover season, and there's no way to get 3 days and 3 nights from the time he was crucified on a Friday to a Sunday morning. And so they changed the whole story to make them be a holy day on Wednesday, so that there'd be 3 days from Wednesday to Saturday, and then they don't want him being resurrected on a Sunday because God forbid he'd be resurrected on a Sunday. But then they said, well, we'll have him up on Saturday night. And so to make the story fit, they changed the whole story. Even many Protestant Christians will say 3 days and 3 nights here is referring to the time in the tomb. It's not. It's not what he's talking about at all. Yes, sir.
It's plain to me that the tomb was not at the heart of the earth also.
Amen. Absolutely. Let's look at the word heart for a minute. It's number 2588 in Strong's, and it means the middle of something. The middle or center. It means the center. It means the middle. So Matthew is telling us that Jesus would be 3 days and 3 nights in the middle of something, or in between something. So let's understand what actually took place. He is between heaven and earth. Keep in mind, Thursday night, he lost his freedom. He was condemned to death. He was condemned to death Thursday night. So he's between being on earth as the world he knew, free man, walking the earth, to being condemned to death. So he's in the middle of something. He's in the middle. He's betwixt and between, from earth and heaven. And so that day, Thursday night, was the night portion. He was condemned. He was deceived, or not deceived, but betrayed that night. So we're going to count 3 nights. We're going to count Thursday night. He was deceived, right? He was taken. So he's between heaven and earth. He's between the freedom that he knew, walking the earth with his disciples, and now he was condemned. So Thursday night was the first night. Friday night was the second night. And Saturday night was the third night. So he's 3 nights in the heart of the earth, in the middle of something. Then let's count the days. Friday was the first day. Saturday was the second day. And what was the third day? Sunday morning. John tells us while it was still yet dark. Now we need to realize what he's talking about, because the other writers make it very clear. It was Sunday morning. So those of you that get up early, when the dawn happens, it's just the light at the horizon. Barely the light at the horizon. But it's the new day. It's the dawning of the new day. The dawn is the beginning light at the horizon. But it's still not light. It's not sunrise. And sometimes between dawn and sunrise can be upwards of an hour. And so sometime between the dawn and sunrise, the ladies come to the tomb. And what happened when they came to the tomb? They found what? It was empty. So sometime between the dawn and sunrise, of course, Sunday morning began when? At the dawn. Okay, so Sunday morning had taken place. So, brethren, it's the only sign that Jesus said he would give. Matthew, the writer here, I won't take time at this point to go into the passages, but he says at least 6 or 8 times after Matthew 12:40 that Jesus is going to be resurrected on the third day. On the third day. On the third day. On the third day. You know, he never mentions the word night. Now, on the third day, as we understand, Friday was the day he was crucified at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And what's the second day? Saturday was the second day. What's the third day? Sunday morning. What did Jesus tell those men on the road to Emmaus when they told him rather, in Luke chapter 24? He says, today is what? The third day since those things took place. So, writer of Luke tells us through Jesus that Sunday was the third day. And so what was the second day? Saturday. What was the first day? Friday. So you can't get a Wednesday crucifixion out of this story, brethren. It's simply not in the Bible. No. But the Church of God, they believe that. And they preach that. But they're blind. They do not see. Look, if you would, in Mark. Go back to the book of Mark. Let's look in Mark 15. Mark chapter 15. Remember in chapter 14 he's condemned. Mark chapter 14 he's condemned. And then the last verse of chapter 14, we know Jesus tells him, before the cock crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. This during Thursday evening. Now look here what happens the next morning. The next morning, chapter 15, verse 1. The next morning, brethren, is Friday morning. There's not room to slide 2 or 3 more days in there. The story is continuous. He says here, and straightway in the morning, that's Friday morning, there's taken to Pilate. And we know what goes on with this story here. I won't take time to read it to you right now. Drop down, if you would, to verse 25. Verse 25. And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. Now, brethren, we know the 3rd hour was the time of the morning sacrifice. And what time is the 3rd hour? 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock in the morning, he was crucified. Notice he goes on to say, and then, if you would, drop down to verse 33. And when the 6th hour was come, the 6th hour would be noon, be 12 o'clock. There was darkness over the whole land, all the land over the land until the 9th hour. And the 9th hour, we know, is the time that he died. The 9th hour. Notice he says, verse 34, in the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, I can't say that word, but you can read it, whatever it is. It says, which is being interpreted, my God, why have you forsaken me? Drop down to verse 37. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost. Gave up the breath. So Jesus died there Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, brethren. The Bible is so clear. Don't let people that have an agenda And the reason they have agenda because they're trying to make 3 days and they're trying to help God out.
Yep, trying to help him.
We don't need to help God out. If you would drop down to verse 42. Drop down to verse 42. And now when the even was come, so that's Friday evening, right? Because it was the preparation.
Yep.
That is the day before the Sabbath.
Yep.
What is the preparation day, brethren? It's always Friday.
Yep.
You will never find the preparation day in this book on any other day.
That's right.
What were you preparing for?
Weekly Sabbath.
The weekly Sabbath. And you had to prepare what? Food. Because you couldn't cook on the Sabbath. So the preparation day is always Friday. It's not the preparation day of a holy day, a preparation day of July the 4th. We got a preparation day for the July 4th day. Don't make sense, does it? There was no preparation day except for the Sabbath. The only day the Bible ever talks about as a preparation day is the 6th day of the week. Because they were preparing food. Because you were to spend the day, instead of cooking food, you'd spend the day with who? With God. With the Almighty. In worship. Brother, we're here today. We're not out cooking meals. We're here eating the meal that God has prepared. And I hope you're filled. I hope you are totally nourished with what God has given us to understand His plan. And His plan has always been for Him to be first in our life. Not second, not third, not 14th, but first. And so, brethren, the Sabbath day was a day that He set aside. He's told us to remember it. And don't be out there preparing food, because I want you spending time with me. But remember, the preparation of food at that time was an all-day affair. I'm not going to debate the fact, is it okay to put a pot of beans on the stove? I'm not going to go down that road. I really believe the Jews took the commandments of God and made more commandments around them.
Yep.
And now they got it where you can't turn a light switch on because you're creating a spark. I don't believe that's what God intended at all. But anyway, that's something for everyone to decide for themselves. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, tell us the original story, the Old Testament Passover. Please understand, it's not a forerunner. It's not a Last Supper. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Passover that Jesus kept is the exact story that we see in Exodus 12.
That's right.
Make no mistake. But the Jews were on a different calendar. Because they had come back from Babylon and they had seen things differently because they had kept their whole life. Their whole life. When was the day beginning?
In the evening.
In the evening. Their whole life, the month was beginning with the crescent moon. The crescent moon was to be worshipped even by the Babylonians. There's a religion today that still worships a crescent. And you know who I'm talking about. But brethren, the day beginning at sunset and the month beginning with the crescent is what God had to tell them, come out of her, my people, because they were entrenched in Babylonian customs. This explains the two calendars in the Synoptic Gospels and the book of John. Let's go to John 13. I'm going to go a little bit over today because I want you to see a couple things here, but I see I'm still not going to get through everything. But it's important that I want you to realize that the Passover that Jesus kept was the Passover, and John is telling us a different story. He's telling us about the Jews' Passover. So the Jews' Passover, people read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then they read the book of John. It's obvious there's conflict. If you don't see there's conflict, then you're not reading it. God has not opened your heart to read or see what's being spoken. Because if you would look in chapter 13, and he says here, now before the feast of the Passover, which Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he would depart out of the world unto the Father, having loved his own, which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. So here we're talking about before the feast of the Passover. Now, this is not talking about before the Passover that he just kept. This is the Passover that the Jews are expecting to be the next day. Do you understand? So Jesus kept the Passover. So the meal he's eating here, look at verse 2. And when supper was ended, the devil, having put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was come from God and went to God, he raised from supper and set aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. So here you're about to see Jesus is adding something to the Passover. Now, I want to make this clear to us, because I was raised in a church that the washing of feet was a part of the Passover service. But brethren, you know that originally it was not so. And so I want us to see the difference here, and I want to talk about this for a minute, and then we'll probably end for the day. But the Passover you see in here, it's before the feast of the Passover, is the Passover that Jesus was keeping. When he raised from supper in verse 2, it is the Passover that he kept in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That supper is the Passover meal. It's not a forerunner or something else. And so John is writing to the Jews based on the Jewish calendar and the Jewish point of view. But once the Passover had ended, Jesus would teach his disciples a lesson. The lesson he would teach them in the lesson of humility. Now, why is it being brought up here? Go to Luke chapter 22. Luke tells us something that the others don't. It's important that we see it. Luke chapter 22. You know how some of the disciples want to say, who's the greatest? I think I'm the greatest. Another one say, I think I'll be the greatest. Everybody wants to be the greatest. Luke chapter 22. Notice in verse 24. And there was a strife among them. Which of them would be accounted the greatest? Who's going to sit on his right hand? Who's going to be on his left hand? You know, how many stripes do I get in my crown, and all these things? And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. And let me go on down. Verse 27, for which is greater, he that sits at meat, or he that serves? Is not he that serves sits at meat, but I am among you as he that serves. You are they which have continued, says me, in my temptations, and I appoint unto you a kingdom as my Father has appointed unto me. And he goes on to say, he's talking about who's going to be the greatest. There's this argument, and he's talking about he who serves is the greatest. Okay, I won't take time to read the whole text there, but this is something that Luke tells us a story that during this time frame, the Last Supper, during this meal, there's an argument between the apostles. So how does Jesus settle that? John 13. John 13, we see that after the meal was over, what did Jesus do? He washed their feet. And he said, he who is greatest, let him be your servant. So brethren, if you'll drop down to verse 14.
In John?
Yeah, John 13, verse 14. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Verily I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that sent greater than he that sent him. So he makes it clear, brethren, that we are to be a servant to our brothers. Now let me explain to you something. Is foot washing a part of the Passover service as it was intended? And the answer is no. It was not. However, because of the argument between the disciples of who's going to be the greatest, Jesus said, I've got to teach them a lesson. So he takes the towel, he girds himself, and he washes all of their feet. You know the story. Peter says, you ain't washing my feet. You know the story. Peter said, and Jesus said, I don't wash your feet, you know part of me. And Peter said, just wash my whole body then. Just wash me all over. And so we understand that indeed, that the washing of the feet. Then he says, I've given you an example. Now here's my question for you. And of course, the church has not met on it, so we'll do it this year. But it's something that the council can debate on and discuss. Jesus said, I've given you an example. You should do as I have done to you. Is he saying that you should wash one another's feet at Passover season as I have done to you? Or is he saying, humble yourselves and be a servant to each other and wash one another's feet from time that someone needs their feet washed? In other words, they were walking in sandy trails all the time, come in with dirty feet, dust everywhere. And so he's telling them, you can wash one another's feet as I have done to you. Did Jesus add foot washing to the Passover service? That's the question I have for you, because I don't know that he did. But what he did do is said, I've done this for you. You do it to one another. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think he's talking about to be humbling yourself before others, to be a servant. And that, like he said, the servant is greater and God greater. Anyway, I think it's a matter of being a servant to one another.
Well, I don't doubt that. I think that is certainly true. But I don't want to be the one to say, Jesus said do something, and I say don't do something, because I don't want to get in that trap. Yes, Brother Dwayne?
Yes, we've been taught that so long that this is part of the Passover service, and did it, that it's a hard thing to consider. I'm going to consider it. I'm going to study on it, because I understand what you're talking about. We can't say that every one of us, when we're eating, should stop something and hand it to somebody to eat and say, is it I, Lord, and all that. That happened during the service, but that's not something we reenact. But we do need to consider it, because if it's a strong enough statement that it was added to the Passover, then we want to do it.
Amen.
If not, then we can decide if we can do it anyway because we want to, or we can skip it. If it's not part of the Passover, it's something we need to study.
Yes, sister.
I think the part here where he was saying, he's done it as an example. And so we can't go wrong by following his example.
Amen. And that's what we've done. Our history has been to do it as a part of the Passover service. I have no problem in saying that we definitely need to wash one another's feet. The Bible's very clear on that. It's humbling yourself to serve others. And that's what you're saying, sister. However, did Jesus make it a part of the Passover service? Was he adding that to the Passover service that you do from now on, for infinitum? Or was he saying, hey, humble yourself and serve one another? Yes, sister.
I don't think he was changing the ceremony, but he does say, I have given you an example, and you should do this for each other. So if we do it, we're not wrong.
Amen. I like your heart there, sister. You can't go wrong in following what Jesus says do as an example. Now, before we close, let me just show you a couple of verses, and then we'll kind of have a breaking point here of whose Passover John is talking about. Look in John chapter 5 and notice verse 1. Now, this is a story of John. It's a book of John. And you know, we got up to John 13 and Jesus is sitting down to supper, but the Jewish Passover was next day. And that's where we have to break off today because I'm just out of time. But look in John chapter 5. After this, there was a feast of the Jews. Speaking of, the Jews have a feast coming up. Okay? If you would, go to chapter 6. Chapter 6. Notice verse 4. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Wow. Do you know what's interesting? Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us that Jesus is keeping the Passover. And do you know how many times they call it the Jews' Passover?
0.
0. We read in Leviticus 23, whose Passover is it, brethren?
Yahweh.
Yes.
It's God's. It's His Passover. It's His holy days. These are my feasts, He says, right?
Right.
These are mine. Yet here we see there's a feast of the Jews in chapter 6 and verse 4. If you would go to chapter 11. Chapter 11. This all leading up to chapter 13. Chapter 11, notice verse 55. 11 verse 55. And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand. Whose Passover? The Jews' Passover. See, it's interesting to me when Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, is telling us the story of Jesus keeping the Passover. It's never referred to as the Jews' Passover. It's the Passover. But when you come to the book of John, it's the Jews' Passover. Why? Because it's a different day. It's on a different calendar. And how do we make these calendars work? I'll tell you how you can make all the problems go away. It's when you start the day at dawn and you start the month with the dark moon. There is no conflict. No conflict. The reason the Jews are on a separate day is because their calendar is different. So do you believe Jesus? I grew up in a church who didn't believe Jesus. They believed the Jews. We follow the Jewish custom and the Jewish traditions. Yet Jesus tells us how many times this is my Passover. It's the Passover that I keep. It is the Passover. It's the exact Passover that we were read about in Exodus chapter 12. So brethren, then in chapter 13, where we will stop today, now we see, now before the Passover, chapter 13, verse 1, the Passover he's talking about is the Jews' Passover. So this event that's taking place here in verse 2 of them eating supper, that's why we called it a Last Supper or Forerunner or some kind of other day.
Lord's Supper.
Yeah, the Lord's Supper. We wanted to make it something different because the Jews' Passover was the next day. And the Jews had to be right? So if we can understand the Jews are wrong, the Jewish calendar is wrong. Okay, so we're going to take a break now just because of a recording. We're already over time. But I hope it's been a blessing to you.